Paige, Morgan's been in an accident." Grant's voice trembled with fear as he clutched his phone. My heart sank as I turned away from the mirror, the shimmering wedding dress draping my body suddenly feeling like a cage. It was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, a celebration of love and commitment. But in that moment, everything changed. Grant's sister, Morgan, had been rushed to the hospital, and the news shattered the joyful anticipation that had filled my bohemian-styled apartment just moments earlier. As Grant hung up the call, his expression morphed from panic to a haunting determination. "I need to go to her," he said, his words laced with an urgency that sent a chill down my spine. I searched his eyes for reassurance, but all I found was a deep, unsettling void. "But the wedding?" I stammered, grasping at the threads of our once-perfect plan. Grant's jaw clenched as he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Paige. I have to be there for Morgan. We'll have to postpone everything." With those words, he turned and rushed out the door, leaving me standing amidst the delicate lace and satin, tears welling in my eyes. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to unravel the dream we had so carefully woven. As the hours ticked by, with no word from Grant, a gnawing suspicion began to take root. His behavior had been changing over the past few weeks, his attention constantly drawn to Morgan's well-being, even during our most intimate moments. Desperate for answers, I reached for my phone and dialed Kevin, my best friend and boss, at the vinyl record store where I worked. "Kev, something's not right," I confided, my voice trembling with uncertainty. Kevin's calming presence offered solace, but it couldn't quell the nagging feeling that Grant's sudden departure was more than just a family emergency. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a whirlwind of betrayal and deceit that would test the very limits of my resilience. The days after Grant's abrupt departure blurred together in a haze of confusion and heartache. I tried to lose myself in the rhythmic melodies of the vinyl records at work, but Kevin's concerned glances only magnified the doubts gnawing at my soul. "He's been acting strange lately," I confided in Kevin one afternoon, my fingers tracing the grooves of a well-worn album cover. "It's like he's a completely different person." Kevin's brow furrowed as he leaned against the counter. "Have you tried talking to him about it?" I shook my head, my lips pressed into a tight line. "Every time I bring it up, he brushes me off or changes the subject." As the weeks passed, Grant's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would come home late, his eyes glazed over, and his phone constantly buzzing with messages he refused to share. The once loving fiancé I had adored was slowly slipping away, replaced by a stranger consumed by a dark obsession with his sister's well-being. One night, as Grant tossed and turned beside me, his phone lit up with a flurry of notifications. Against my better judgment, I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw made my blood run cold. A string of intimate messages between Grant and a woman named Alicia. Who's she talking about? Alicia's message read, "Your sister or your fiancé?" Grant's reply was swift and chilling. "Both. They're both wrapped around my finger." I recoiled in horror, my mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. Was Grant having an affair? Was Morgan involved in some twisted way? The certainty I had once felt about our relationship crumbled like a house of cards. In the days that followed, I became consumed by a burning desire to uncover the truth. I scoured Grant's emails and bank statements, piecing together a trail of financial discrepancies, lavish gifts, secret purchases, and unexplained wire transfers. "He's been playing us both," I confessed to Kevin, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and betrayal. "I need to stop him before he ruins everything." Kevin's eyes widened, but he nodded solemnly. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you." With Kevin's support, I began to collect evidence, screenshots, receipts, and damning messages, building a case against Grant's deceit. Each new discovery fueled the fire within me, transforming my pain into a burning determination for revenge. As the wedding date loomed closer, Grant's behavior became increasingly unhinged. He would disappear for hours, only to return with flimsy excuses and a haunted look in his eyes. It was as if he were a puppet, dancing to the tune of some unseen force. Finally, the night before our wedding, Grant announced he had to meet a business associate for an urgent matter. I knew in my gut that this was no ordinary meeting. Without hesitation, I followed him, tracking his movements through the city until he arrived at a secluded hotel. And there, in the dimly lit parking lot, I witnessed the ultimate betrayal. Grant embracing Alicia, whispering promises of a future together, away from the lies and deception that had consumed our lives. As I watched them from the shadows, a cold resolve washed over me. Grant had sealed his fate, and now it was my turn to make him pay. In the aftermath of witnessing Grant's ultimate betrayal, a fire ignited within me, fueling my determination to unravel the twisted web of deceit he had woven. No longer would I be the naive, trusting fiancé blinded by love. It was time to fight back. The next morning, as Grant emerged from the bedroom, his hair disheveled and his eyes heavy with guilt, I confronted him head-on. "So how was your business meeting last night?" I spat, my words laced with venom. Grant froze, his face drained of color. "Paige, I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off, my hands trembling with rage. "I saw you with Alicia. How long has this been going on?" For a moment, Grant remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then, with a resigned sigh, he lifted his eyes to meet mine. "Longer than you think." As the sordid details spilled from his lips, a sickening realization dawned upon me. Alicia had been manipulating both Grant and his sister, Morgan, for years. She had wormed her way into their lives, exploiting their vulnerabilities and driving a wedge between them, all for her own twisted gain. "She's been playing us all," Grant admitted, his voice thick with shame. I was too blind to see it. But as the truth unraveled, it became clear that Grant's hands were far from clean. He had been funneling money to Alicia, showering her with expensive gifts and indulging her every whim, all while lying to me about our financial situation. "How could you do this to me?" I cried, hot tears streaming down my cheeks. "After everything we've been through together?" Grant's shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm sorry, Paige. I never meant for it to go this far." But his apologies rang hollow, a feeble attempt to assuage the pain he had inflicted. In that moment, I realized that the man I had once loved was nothing more than a shadow, a puppet dancing to Alicia's twisted tune. As the days ticked by, the wedding preparations continued, a cruel charade that only served to fuel my simmering rage. Grant tried to make amends, offering empty promises and half-hearted gestures, but I had seen the truth in his actions, and there was no turning back. "You need to cancel everything," I told him one night, my voice steely with resolve. "This wedding is a lie, and I won't be a part of it." Grant's eyes widened, pleading with me to reconsider. "Paige, please, let's talk about this." But my mind was made up. "Do whatever you want, just cancel everything. It's over." As I uttered those words, a weight lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a burning determination to make Grant and Alicia pay for their betrayal. No longer would I be the victim. It was time to take control and enact my revenge. In the days leading up to the wedding, I meticulously gathered evidence, compiling a dossier of their misdeeds, financial records, incriminating messages, and even surveillance footage that captured their illicit encounters. With each new piece of damning proof, my resolve hardened, and a plan began to take shape. On the eve of what should have been our wedding day, I made a silent vow. Grant and Alicia would face the consequences of their actions, and I would be the one to deliver the ultimate payback. With Grant's confession and the revelations about Alicia's manipulative schemes, a fire ignited within me, a burning desire for justice that would not be extinguished until I exposed their betrayal and made them pay for their actions. I became a woman possessed, scouring every nook and cranny for evidence of their deceit. Bank statements, credit card bills, even Grant's hidden stash of burner phones. Nothing was off limits in my quest for the truth, and with each new discovery, the picture became clearer. Grant had been funneling money to Alicia for years, lavishing her with extravagant gifts and vacations, all while lying to me about our finances. The depth of his deception was staggering, and yet he had the audacity to beg for my forgiveness. "Paige, please, let me make it up to you," he pleaded one evening as I pored over a stack of incriminating receipts. "It was all Alicia's doing. She manipulated me." I scoffed, my fingers tightening around the damning evidence. "Save it, Grant. I'm done with your lies." His eyes widened, panic setting in as he realized the gravity of the situation. "What are you going to do?" A twisted smile crept across my lips. "Oh, you'll see." In the days that followed, I became a master of subterfuge, shadowing Grant's every move and documenting his clandestine meetings with Alicia. I captured them in their most intimate moments, their lips locked in passionate embraces, their bodies intertwined in a twisted dance of betrayal. And as the evidence mounted, a plan began to take shape, a grand scheme to expose their duplicity and bring their house of cards crashing down around them. "I have everything I need," I confided in Kevin one night, spreading the damning photographs and financial records across the counter of the vinyl store. "It's time to make my move." Kevin's eyes widened as he took in the sheer magnitude of Grant and Alicia's deception. "Paige, this is—" He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. "I know," I replied, my voice steely with resolve, "and they're going to pay for what they've done." As the days ticked down to what should have been our wedding, the tension mounted. Grant grew increasingly agitated, sensing that the noose was tightening around his neck. But still, he clung to the delusion that he could salvage our relationship, that his empty promises and hollow apologies would be enough to make me forget his transgressions. "Paige, I'm begging you," he pleaded one night, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Don't do anything rash. Think about what you're risking." But his words fell on deaf ears. I had already made up my mind. There would be no turning back, no second chances. Grant and Alicia had sealed their fate, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. On the eve of our scheduled wedding day, I made the final preparations, gathering the evidence and steeling myself for the confrontation to come. As I looked in the mirror, the reflection staring back at me was one of a woman transformed, a woman who had endured the ultimate betrayal and emerged stronger, more determined than ever before. And as the sun rose on what should have been the happiest day of my life, I knew that this was no longer about love or commitment. This was about revenge, pure and simple, and Grant and Alicia were about to learn the true cost of their deceit. The day before our supposed wedding, the air was thick with tension. Grant tried his best to act nonchalant, but I could see the guilt etched on his face every time he looked at me. As I busied myself with last-minute preparations, he approached me hesitantly. "Paige, I have to meet with a business associate tonight," he said, avoiding my gaze. I fought back a bitter laugh. "A business associate, or is it Alicia?" Grant's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to silence him. "Save it, Grant. I'm done with your lies." I turned away, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. He reached out, his fingers grazing my arm. "Paige, please, it's not what you think." I jerked away from his touch, whirling around to face him. "Then what is it, Grant? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been betraying me for months, maybe even years." His shoulders slumped, and he let out a defeated sigh. "You're right. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I swear I never meant to hurt you." "Well, you did," I spat, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "And now it's time to face the consequences." As he opened his mouth to protest, I held up a hand, silencing him once more. "Just go, Grant. Go meet your precious Alicia. But know this, whatever happens next, it's on you." With that, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the apartment, leaving him standing there, a pathetic shell of the man I once loved. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, a newfound sense of determination washed over me. I knew what I had to do. I had to catch Grant and Alicia in the act, to expose their betrayal in the most public, humiliating way possible. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called Kevin. "Kev, I need your help," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Kevin's familiar voice cut through the silence. "Anything, Paige. What do you need?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I'm going to follow Grant tonight. I need you to be ready with the evidence, everything we've collected." Kevin didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. Just say the word, and I'll be there." As I ended the call, a sense of calm settled over me. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The chance to make Grant and Alicia pay for their deceit. I tailed Grant from a safe distance, my heart pounding in my chest as he made his way to a secluded hotel on the outskirts of town. Sure enough, there she was, Alicia, waiting for him in the dimly lit parking lot, her arms outstretched in an embrace that made my stomach churn. I watched, my fingers tightening around my phone, as they disappeared into the hotel, their laughter echoing through the night like a twisted mockery of the love we once shared. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. With a few taps on my screen, I sent a message to Kevin, the weight of my decision settling heavily on my shoulders. It's time. Bring everything you've got. We're going to stop this wedding once and for all. The grand wedding venue was a vision of elegance, with delicate flower arrangements adorning every surface and soft music filling the air. But as I stood there, surrounded by the trappings of what should have been the happiest day of my life, all I could feel was a burning rage. Grant fidgeted nervously beside me, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Paige, please," he whispered, his voice strained. "Let's just call this whole thing off. We can start over, I swear." I turned to him, my eyes blazing with fury. "Start over?" I scoffed. "After everything you've done? After all the lies and betrayal?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. In that moment, the sounds of the arriving guests faded into the background, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. As the ceremony began, I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing with 1,000 different emotions. Part of me wanted to run, to flee from this twisted charade and leave Grant and his web of deceit behind. But a stronger force kept me rooted to the spot, the burning desire for justice, for vengeance. And then, as the officiant began to speak, I saw him, Kevin, slipping through the crowd like a silent guardian angel, a flash drive clutched in his hand. Our eyes met, and he gave a subtle nod, a silent confirmation that the moment had arrived. Without warning, I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the hushed silence like a knife. "Stop!" I shouted, drawing all eyes towards me. "This wedding can't go on." Grant's face drained of color as he turned to face me, his eyes wide with panic. "Paige, what are you doing?" But I didn't falter, my gaze fixed on the crowd before me. "This man," I declared, gesturing towards Grant, "has been lying to all of us. He's been carrying on an affair, betraying me in the worst possible way." A collective gasp rippled through the guests, and I could see the shock and disbelief etched on their faces. But I wasn't done yet. "Not only that," I continued, my voice rising with each word, "but he's been funneling money, our money, to his mistress. He's been living a double life, playing us all for fools." Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. He was trapped, caught in the web of his own lies. "Don't believe me?" I turned to Kevin, who stepped forward, holding up the flash drive. "I have proof. Financial records, text messages, even surveillance footage of Grant and his mistress together." With a few clicks, the damning evidence began to play on the large screens flanking the altar, leaving no doubt as to the depth of Grant's betrayal. The room erupted into chaos, with guests shouting and hurling accusations at the man who was supposed to be my husband. But through it all, I stood tall, my chin raised defiantly, reveling in the sweet taste of revenge. Grant turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Paige, please, I can explain." But I cut him off with a cold, bitter laugh. "Explain? What's there to explain, Grant? You've been lying to me from the start. You never loved me. I was just a means to an end, another pawn in your twisted game." As the words left my lips, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I had been carrying for far too long. In that moment, I was free, free from the shackles of Grant's deceit, free to reclaim my life and my dignity. And as the guests began to disperse, murmuring their disbelief and disgust, I turned to Grant one last time, my eyes alight with a newfound strength. "It's over," I said, my voice unwavering. "You've lost everything, your money, your reputation, and any chance you ever had at happiness with me. This is the end, Grant. The end of your lies, and the beginning of my new life." With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving Grant standing alone in the ruins of his own making, a broken man brought to his knees by the weight of his own betrayal. In the aftermath of the disastrous wedding, the world seemed to shift on its axis. As the dust settled and the initial shock wore off, a new reality began to take shape. One where Grant's web of lies lay in tatters, exposed for all to see. I retreated to the safety of my family home, seeking solace in the warm embrace of my parents. Their eyes shone with a mixture of pride and sorrow as they held me close, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," my father murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "That snake got what was coming to him." My mother nodded, her hand gently stroking my hair. "We're here for you, Paige. Always." Their unwavering support was a balm to my wounded soul, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and family could prevail. As the days passed, the fallout from the wedding disaster continued to ripple through our lives. Grant's parents, once so proud and aloof, were forced to confront the harsh reality of their son's betrayal. I'll never forget the look on his mother's face when she showed up at my doorstep, her usual composure cracked, and her eyes rimmed with tears. "Paige," she choked out, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. We had no idea." I stood there, uncertain of how to respond. This was the woman who had once looked down on me, who had deemed me unworthy of her precious son, and yet, in that moment, all I could see was a broken mother, her world shattered by the actions of the child she had trusted. "He's lost everything," she continued, her words tumbling out in a torrent of grief. His job, his money, his future, all because of that wretched woman he was seeing. I nodded, my own anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Alicia." I spat out the name like a curse. She was the one pulling the strings all along. Mrs. Grant's eyes widened, and she clutched at my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You know about her? Tell me everything, Paige. I need to know the truth." And so I did. I laid it all out, the financial records, the incriminating text messages, the sordid details of Grant and Alicia's twisted affair. With each new revelation, Mrs. Grant's face grew paler, her carefully cultivated poise crumbling into dust. By the time I finished, she was a shell of her former self, her eyes hollow and her shoulders slumped in defeat. "My son," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What have I done to deserve this?" In that moment, I felt a pang of pity for this once formidable woman. She had been betrayed, not just by her son, but by the very foundations of the life she had built. But pity quickly gave way to resolve as I turned my attention to the next phase of my plan. With Grant's life in ruins and his family reeling from the fallout, it was time to deal with the true architect of this tragedy, Alicia. I tracked her down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. Her once polished veneer cracked and faded. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Well, well," she sneered, her lips curling into a twisted smirk. "If it isn't the jilted bride herself." I didn't flinch, my gaze steady and unwavering. "It's over, Alicia. Your little game is up." She scoffed, tossing her head back in a mockery of nonchalance. "Game? I don't know what you're talking about." But I wasn't buying her act. Not anymore. With a flick of my wrist, I produced the damning evidence, a trail of financial records and incriminating photos that left no room for doubt. Alicia's bravado faltered as she flipped through the pages, her eyes growing wider with each passing moment. "How?" she stammered, her voice catching in her throat. "It doesn't matter how," I cut her off, my voice cold and unyielding. "What matters is that you're finished. You've lost your hold over Grant, and now you're nothing but a pathetic, broken shell of a woman." For a moment she stared at me, her eyes burning with a mixture of rage and fear. Then, without warning, she crumpled to the floor, her body racked with sobs. "You don't understand," she wailed, her words punctuated by ragged gasps. "I had to do it. He was my only chance at a better life." I felt a twinge of pity, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a wave of disgust. This woman had torn my life apart, all in pursuit of her own selfish desires. "Save it," I spat, turning my back on her pitiful form. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." As I walked away, I could hear her cries echoing down the dingy hallway, a haunting reminder of the depths to which some people will sink in pursuit of their twisted ambitions. But I didn't look back. Not this time. My path lay ahead, a road paved with the ashes of Grant and Alicia's deceit, and I was determined to forge a new life from the rubble of their betrayal. In the weeks that followed my confrontation with Alicia, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted. A burden I had been carrying for far too long finally cast aside. As I wandered the familiar streets of my hometown, I found myself drawn to the places that had once brought me solace. The cozy vinyl store where I had spent countless hours losing myself in the rhythmic grooves of old records. The quaint coffee shop where Kevin and I would swap stories and dreams. It was in these places that I began to find myself again, to rediscover the parts of me that had been buried beneath the debris of Grant and Alicia's betrayal. Kevin was there, as he had always been, a steadfast presence in my life. We would sit for hours, sipping our drinks and discussing the events that had turned our world upside down. "I still can't believe it," he would say, shaking his head in disbelief. "How could he do that to you?" I would simply shrug, the anger that had once consumed me replaced by a weary acceptance. "It doesn't matter now," I would reply. "He's the one who has to live with the consequences of his actions." And indeed, the consequences for Grant were swift and severe. His once promising career lay in tatters, his financial empire crumbling under the weight of his deception. Even his own family had turned their backs on him, unable to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster he had become. As for Alicia, she had simply vanished. Her grand schemes and manipulations reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale of greed and hubris. In the midst of it all, I found solace in the familiar rhythm of my life, the comforting melodies of the vinyl store, the warmth of my parents' embrace, the unwavering support of friends like Kevin. It was in these moments that I realized the true strength of the bonds that had been forged through this ordeal. While Grant and Alicia had sought to tear me down, to strip me of my dignity and self-worth, they had ultimately failed. For, in their wake, I had discovered a resilience within myself that I never knew existed. A determination to rise above the ashes of their betrayal and forge a new path, one that was true to my own desires and ambitions. And so, with a newfound sense of purpose, I set about rebuilding my life. I poured my heart and soul into the vinyl store, curating a collection that celebrated the raw emotions and unvarnished truth that had been so lacking in my relationship with Grant. Slowly but surely, the store became a sanctuary, a gathering place for kindred spirits who sought refuge in the timeless melodies of bygone eras. And through it all, Kevin was by my side, a constant source of support and encouragement. "You're doing amazing things, Paige," he would say, his eyes shining with pride. "This place, it's a reflection of who you really are." And he was right. In the process of rebuilding, I had rediscovered the parts of myself that had been lost: the dreamer, the artist, the seeker of truth and beauty. As the months passed, I found myself letting go of the anger and bitterness that had once consumed me. In their place, a newfound sense of peace took root, a quiet understanding that the path ahead was mine to forge, free from the shackles of Grant and Alicia's deceit. And in those quiet moments, as the warm crackle of vinyl filled the air and the familiar melodies washed over me, I would smile to myself, secure in the knowledge that I had emerged from the ashes of betrayal, stronger and more resilient than ever before. For in the end, it was not Grant or Alicia who had triumphed, but the indomitable human spirit, the ability to rise above the darkness and forge a new path, one step at a time, towards the light of a brighter tomorrow.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. "Do you know how much revenue we get from that company?" "We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs. Gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized." Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. "All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason." "What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do." "I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you." "Please." Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, "Yes. That's Nick for you." Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry." Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hope to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.